Scott,
Hey Marty.
how's it going?
Oh, pretty good. How about you?
I'm good. I'm excited to get started with this book, Mystical Atheism or Experiments in Mystical Atheism with Brook Ziporyn. Looking forward to going on this journey with you and anybody else that wants to come along. We found this book and it seemed like just the right fit for beginning our book study together and kind of a retrospective of our time together as friends and as fellow journeyers into the unknown, I suppose. Anyways, that's where I'm at. What about you?
Yeah, I think it's a really great book because it's not really trying to make a an argument so much as talking about the process of doing philosophy and of sort of engaging a life as a philosophical life.
Yeah,
And and not just philosophy, but like religion and spirituality, mysticism, like experiencing art and kind of anything that transforms our has a potential of transforming our world.
yeah. Cultivating new ways of being in the world. Always something that's been exciting for you and for me, and a real big part of our journey, which, in terms of our friendship, is going on what, 34, maybe 35 years now? I think it was 1991 the first time that we met each other at Indiana University as undergraduates.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's it has been a it's been an it's yeah, it's gone fast for sure too. Like I feel like we've went through a lot of things together at IU, and then it's like ever since then kind of like parallel journeys. And kind of I think it will be interesting to talk about how we um, kind of we both were led into philosophy or thought about like why we were drawn to philosophy to begin with. Um,
Yeah.
and I would just say that like for me, I was brought up in a house where I was there was my dad was like very like a scientist, or like he was actually an engineer, but we loved science and was like really like got me interested in astronomy and thinking about cosmology. And we had like Carl Sagan's Cosmos was like a one of my favorite books when I was a kid to like look
Mm.
at. And I was just like really like preoccupied with that, thinking about kind of how where everything came from, what was like came before me, and what came was going to come after. And I feel like those were exciting questions that I had, and I had it was like a very like a lot of questions about the mysteries that of the world too. But then I kind of felt like I went to church, and it was kind of like I was told what to think and told like, oh yeah, there's this God that controls everything, that knows everything, has a plan for your life, and you just believe that, and then you will, you're going to go to heaven as long as you believe these things. And it just was, you know, kind of the opposite, kind of like a more of a stifling experience than it was like an emancipatory like experience, which like that I had experienced, kind of like thinking about philosophy and cosmology.
Yeah, for sure. Uh, Similarly, I was thinking about the bigger picture pretty early on. So I was thinking about, where does it all come from beyond just, the obvious sort of answers from church. Because I remember asking my mom very early on, well, if God made everything, where does he come from or whatever? So, and that kind of like put me into some sort of existential free fall when, she was just like, well, I mean, she said it in kind of a funny way. It's like he's a magic man and like he made himself. Later on at starting at IU, we'd find out that this is called sui generis or an uncaused cause or whatever, but like just like this self-creating, um, you know, whatever that could possibly mean, ex nihilo, from nothing, personality with intentions and design ideas or whatever. So that was pretty difficult to wrap my head around. Not, I mean, I can understand a personality with intentions. What I couldn't understand is where that comes from, a personality with intentions or whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, I I think I was um I had difficulty with the when I was like I guess in probably sixth grade when they started teaching us about not sixth grade, I'm sorry, I was probably 10 or so about the whole for us as a Protestant, it was like the faith, it's like accepting Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior thing, but it was like you have to kind of go through these like stages of like your thinking and accepting that you're a sinner and that like Jesus died for your sins and that and the whole story just was like really just not satisfying to me. Is like why would Jesus, this perfect person, sacrificing his life for me, like
And why does God require that?
and why, yeah, like there's a lot of questions there that don't really like fit together, but it's just like, hey, like just believe this and you're good,
Yeah,
like, and then
safety
you don't have
belt.
to think. Yeah,
Pascal's wager.
yeah. um so yeah, I guess like I definitely had a lot of questions, and I think like this is, I mean, what is it's interesting how this kind of fits with maybe some of the things Brooke like has this kind of epiphany he talks about like on this boat
Mhm.
trip. I don't know if you want to like tell that story real quick and
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I think, especially now that I've become aware of his work recently, just looking at the trajectory of it, I think these are all ideas that were always with him, and he was always writing about. But like, apparently, at some point, he was on a boat trip, and there was only one other person on the boat that spoke English, and that was the ship's captain, like a Polish captain or something like that. He was saying, and it might even been on a boat to China, I think Brooke was saying, because he was, studying Chinese religion and Chinese language. So perhaps something also to mention. He was, got his training at the University of Michigan, sinology and just history of Chinese religions, basically. But anyway, on this boat, he was talking to the captain, and the captain just said out of the blue, apparently, but I kind of doubt it was totally out of the blue. But just like there was one idea I can't stand, it's the idea of God. And Brooke kind of realized that, he felt the same, but that perhaps with some distinction, the distinction would be that, he wasn't opposed to the idea of like mystical reality. He says he doesn't believe in a lot of it, but like, or like, what people would call like, I don't know, religious phenomenon or something like that. He's not opposed to that. He's just opposed to like a God that has a particular intention and purpose that we all kind of have to adhere to. And also, I mean, just part of the rejection of the idea is like there's like not a lot of evidence for that kind of a thing. So there's just seemed to be multiple conflicting, intentions in the world and pretty hard to unify under one kind of idea of like what's good, what's bad, what's acceptable, what isn't, these kind of things. So, I mean, that's the one thing that purpose or intention does is it kind of like it defines like a set defines like what belongs and what doesn't. It becomes this sort of like way of knowing the world through binary oppositions, like the saved and the not saved, or the chosen and the the those who have to burn in hell for all of eternity, eternal conscious torment or whatever, like these things are just totally ludicrous. And
But I
so,
think,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think he seems to say, the big thrust of it. Yeah, I agree that he's like there isn't a lot of support for these things, but a lot of the things he also says is like it also just shuts down like
Hmm.
any kind of like anytime that the thinking gets good, anytime there's something like new and exciting like happening or some speculation that you're having, it's like, oh no, I've got to like square this with how does this work with this all controlling, all like powerful God? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
it's like it's almost like a say like a I don't know what you would call it, like, it's a constraint to thought that he
Right.
finds
Yeah.
objectionable. Like,
Yeah. And so I think both you and I kind of like pretty quickly got into process theology at Indiana University because of this exact deal, where process kind of allow or process philosophy also allows spirituality, a sense of perhaps God, but not a God that is controlling and decides what's good and bad, but a God that's in some sense even indeterminate. So becoming without any, guarantees of what's going to happen next, because like there isn't this controlling intention behind this kind of God. This God is in it with us, basically, like a
yeah,
part of us, and like without any, not really knowing how or where this is going to go, kind of thing.
yeah, for sure. And I even in high school when I was thinking about God and I was thinking like one of the big, thoughts that comes to a lot of people is like and I know I was struggling with is like they call the problem of evil, but
Hmm.
basically like how could an all-powerful, all-knowing like God like permit evil to happen? And
Yeah.
I mean, this was like took on a real like resonance in my life. Resonance in my life was like my mom was like struggled with like cancer and ended up like dying of cancer at a like very young age while I was in high school. And so it was like, despite all of these believers around me and my whole church
It's
praying
for a
and like,
bigger reason or something.
yeah,
God
there's
has
no,
God has his intentions that, are just a mystery.
yeah. And it's like, it's just very, I mean, obviously personal and very like dissatisfying, but I could also think of like, there's a way out is like, and it fit for me with my scientific thinking, which is like, God must play by the same rules that we do. Like
Hmm.
that,
Bound
you
by
know,
them, yeah.
yeah, like God is not, I mean, all powerful to the extent that God could break the laws of physics and the natural world to like actually like cure someone's cancer.
Hmm.
And that's just like that's reality and God. And I mean, it to me, it even like deepened the idea of God's love was because God is like
Mm.
suffering with us in our
Yeah,
physical reality,
yeah,
unable to do something to save who God loves, and and part of the transformation of God's love is that we can make even despite the worst things happening, we can always find meaning and a way forward through love to
yeah.
something to a future, even if it's
Mm.
painful. So
Yeah.
to me, it solved a lot of problems. Process, philosophy and theology. It saved God as like I was like, okay, I can have it. I can still keep this. Um. Anyway, I guess and it was we. This is part of the reason we named this podcast, the adventures in mystical atheism, because the this was like Alfred North Whitehead, who was like one of the first proponents of process philosophy or process theology, has wrote a book called Adventures in, or I, sorry, Adventures in Ideas or Ventures of Ideas. And so we were like kind of paying homage to him and to our one of our professors, like James Hart, who was taught us phenomenology at Indiana University, and got us reading Whitehead and there. So yeah,
And all the classics. I mean, we
yes.
learned, I mean, I that's where I read the dialogues, and that's where I read the Republic and the Nicomachean Ethics and all that. That's where I read Plotinus, everything, all the and whatever mystical thought, that we were introduced to, the Pseudo Dionysus or whoever. I was all through James Hart. Yeah.
Yeah. And while we're naming people, just as Richard Miller, I feel like, another person who we took classes with who
Augustine, Kierkegaard, yeah, everything.
Freud.
Freud, oh yeah, all of our Freud, yeah, and a lot of Freud, which was great.
Yes.
And
Yes.
very unusual in a religious studies department, but we got a great education in Freud, so yeah,
So it
but
prepared us well for bagging groceries later in life.
that's right. We were the best.
Yes.
Yeah, but yeah. So anyway, the frame of a lot of this book is intention versus the unintentional. And a lot of this comes through his Chinese study in Chinese religion, particularly, just to start off with the concept of Wu Wei and Taoism, which neither one of us have a background in Eastern religions at all. I mean, I took a Buddhism class, I've taken a Hinduism class, like just not a lot. So, anyways, but the and I've done some reading as well, but like everything that I'm learning pretty much is going to be through this book, Brooks' introduction to it. So it's not going to be super in depth, but what's so great about this book is that it connects these ideas to Western philosophers who we are familiar with. But the idea of Wu Wei, which I think a lot of Westerners have heard of before, especially because there is I don't know, a general sense about, what the Tao is and Taoism as this like sort of like way that can't be named, and this way that if you think you found the way, then you haven't, that kind of that kind of fun stuff. And you have a general association with Taoism and like structuralist things like the flow of water and stuff like that. But like purposeless action is the way that Wu Wei normally gets translated. And so you can see the juxtaposition there of an intention or a purpose, and then but like there's it's like doing without a doer, or acting without a end goal, or acting without a purpose, or without a governing intention, and this is the connection to the monotheistic God. So like with a monotheistic intentional God, his intentions, usually his in the West, intention is to like, divide the world up according to, purpose or the end goal, so that you get like, the good and the bad, and you get the right and the wrong and all this kind of stuff. You're either in God's will or out of God's will. And so then this is why you wind up needing God to, you know, get into infant or not infant, sorry, but into child sacrifice, and kill his own son so that his son can redeem the world or whatever. Because God, the way it was explained to me is like God is like all good, and so like you have to be like washed in such a way that you become good, by the sacrifice, because you can't do that on your own accord. And so like that way God can hang out with you afterwards in heaven, because you've been washed, and now you're radiant just like God or whatever, through your baptism. It was described a lot of ways. We definitely didn't have any of the Protestant. I was raised Catholic, of the Protestant, like God's your, personal Lord and Savior. Is like the church is your vehicle, is what mediates your salvation or whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, I when I just when you mentioned this the Wu Wei thing, I just wanted to read this quote here, which I thought was like the from Brooke from the book, um, which I think like does a great job of summarizing what you were saying. Um, it says that my focal point then is the paradoxical question of the ultimate status and value of purpose as such. And it is here that Chinese thought becomes crucial for properly taking in the scope and implications of this question, for it was the early Taoist and Confucian thinkers who first made the decisive breakthrough on this question, the stunning suggestion that both human life and the universal process are ultimately grounded in what they call Wu Wei, non deliberate activity, rather than planning, purpose, or anyone's mental control.
Hmm. Yeah, it speaks so much to me in my experience. As somebody who's struggled with a sense of unified purpose, a sense of unified intention, even a unified self my whole life, having so many different purposes bubbling up from within me, so many different intentions, it's really hard. It's always been very hard for me to like unify them into one thing. And it's nice because, Ziporyn kind of like outlines like a tradition in Chinese religion that, says that, that's,
Doesn't rely on that.
yeah,
Like,
it's not unnecessary, so,
yeah, no, I
uh,
think it is good. Like what you brought up also brings up another, like a really important part of the introduction or the preface, I believe, too, where Brooke talks about his personality, and one aspect of his personality is like what you're describing is kind of this sense of like non-identity with himself, and
yeah.
the sense of like was we described it as being different than yourself, like or wanting to be different than who you are, or a sense that you are not
Or
defined
that you're
by,
not what, yeah, right.
yeah, that they're
That,
like somehow you're not known. People don't like, there's something about us that, and that we're not even know, we don't might even know about, like that we're not clear
right.
about
Yeah,
what,
we don't
right?
know
But
ourselves and others don't know us. And it can feel frustrating or exciting, depending on like, how you look at it. Usually in our society, because we're taught to identify ourselves in ways that is easy for other people to understand, um, so that make community, I guess, or make the boxes that you are supposed to fit into. Make those things be who you are, so that you can translate yourself to other people. But you always wind up feeling lost in translation in those, for me at any rate, in those
for sure.
in those articulations every time you try to I'm this, I'm that, like, so it's something that Siporin calls, and I've also heard it called before, that just the misrecognition of identity. So like, whatever, however I identify myself, there's not just like the part of it that accurately depicts me, there's also built into it a misrecognition of who I am. Every time I make an identification of another person, it's the same thing. I identify them, but I also misrecognize them by whatever identity I've given to them or whatever. So they're both are happening at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I think this also speaks to kind of like I think an aspect of both our personalities, which is an attempt to like find ourselves maybe like through other people or through other people's experiences, or like to like go in to encounter those differences, like to
Mm.
intentionally encounter like, you know,
And
the,
enjoy difference, like enjoy,
yes,
not knowing, like being in and over our heads, and that kind of a thing.
right.
Like, this is not Kansas anymore, is just like a wonderful place to be. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of those, I think a great example for me was like when I was struggling to find an idea or like a religious practice that like worked for me. And you were in starting to, or like you were definitely in your full blown Thomas Merton mystical uh, Catholic mystical tradition reading, and I was definitely like, wow, this is like something that is totally out of my
Hmm.
like. out of my league, not out of my zone, like coming from, this Protestant tradition that does, I mean, certainly like going way back has some like mystical elements to it as well, but it's like not certainly not like the same way as you having like contemplatives and having actual like, monasteries where people are intentionally like seeking out mystical experience. And so I don't know, like that was like, very intriguing to me, and wanting to explore that with you was like make, really made a big impact on my life.
Yeah, we went down to Gethsemane together, kind of like on my modeling journey after reading Seven Story Mountain, which I actually read in an English class. I didn't even read that in religious studies class. I just really bought it hook, line, and sink in the what am I trying to say? Hook, line, and sinker. Hook, line, and sink.
Yes.
It's fishing metaphor, but I don't know.
Yes.
But whatever this is, it a sink? I don't know. But
Yeah.
anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. Like a weight that you put
Yeah,
on
yeah,
the.
right. Okay, yeah, wow. But anyway, we went down there and it was pretty gnarly actually, because of the silence was very hard for me to take and I like really started to go crazy. And we broke, rules really, really early on and talked to each other probably when we shouldn't have been and stuff like that. But I should mention that they take a vow of silence down there. So it's a very serious contemplative life, for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, um, I think it also was like you were reading Dorothy Day at the time, which I think
Yeah,
was, I think that's like worth mentioning because I mean there was a connection between Thomas Merton and Dorothy Day, correct?
for sure. Yeah, yeah, no, yeah, they were aware of each other and they wrote to each other. And Dorothy Day kind of saw herself as like active, but still to some degree a contemplative. So Merton in Seven Story Mountain and some other stuff too, like talked about the importance of contemplation and contemplative prayer and how, from his perspective, it was active. It was actually, oriented to like, I don't know, he obviously using a metaphor, but like holding the world together, through this prayer or whatever. And then, Dorothy Day is somebody within, Catholic, loosely social justice circles, very well known as somebody who kind of saw herself in the tradition of like a mendicant order, but she never, joined a particular order or anything like that. She kind of independently, with Peter Murin, like did the whole Catholic worker thing. And yeah, that became very influential for both of us, and especially like it transitioned us not to the monastery, but to the Catholic Social Justice Network after school, because compared to the silence of the monastery, it was it was a really difficult place to be. So we went into something that where we were encountering a lot of challenging circumstances for sure, um, and trying to, learn from all of that. But so then we were in the Catholic Social Justice Network and, Catholic Worker and all that kind of stuff. And I just will say that, Dorothy Day's, I think autobiography is called The Long Loneliness, and she thought of herself as sort of, uh, in solitude, even though she was surrounded by chaos. So like that was the connection between Merton and Day is like she wrote to him about that, and about, what it means to be a contemplative kind of like in the midst of like this work that she was doing at the Catholic Worker.
Yeah, I think just to briefly mention, I mean, like you moved to Chicago and as and taught in like in a Catholic school, like a
Intercede Teaching
in
Corps, yeah.
in on the south side of Chicago, right? And I moved to Detroit and worked in did some like housing work in uh eviction defense, like housing advocacy and organizing. And I really saw it as like an extension. Like I was already like definitely like leaning pretty far to the left, if not very far to the left, at
Yeah,
that point in my life, and so there was like, this ability to kind of pull these pieces together, in something of a like a coherent, I don't know, maybe not coherent, but it was like to ex to try to do something. Let's put it that way. Let me go live a life and like immerse myself in something that I where I'm out of place and try to do good, and mess up a lot in the
yeah,
process, but
yeah. Yeah, the
overall,
spirituality of service, I think, is going to relate as we talk more about this to this sort of like intentionless intention or purposeless action that um, Ziporyn talks about, and we'll get into it more later. But whenever you encounter, difference, a lot of what you thought about the world, starts to starts to not work anymore. And so this like sort of like disjunction between, the way in which you understood things before and like what you're trying to understand, what you're trying to see going on around you, especially when you're talking about, situations of poverty, which neither one of us came from. You're really trying, when you're in service, you're trying to figure out like, how to be this vehicle. But as the cliche goes, you wind up learning, just as much as, or you wind up receiving just as much as you give, if not more, because you learn to, well, you can. One thing you can do, you don't have to, but one thing you can do is learn to inhabit the world in such a way where you're not always trying to correctly identify everything immediately. You're just trying to learn how to listen and be attentive and actually do something that's good or whatever. And that requires this sort of second kind of Eastern thing that Brooks is going to talk a lot about besides Wu Wei, which is this no self part of Buddhism, because what you're doing a lot of times in a service situation is you're having to reduce the self in a sense. You're having to give up a lot of a lot of the self, like a lot of what you thought you knew, a lot of what you thought about what you were, because like you're going to be like continually revealed to yourself new, and the more difficult the situation is, you're gonna find out that you're not how you thought you were, and the world isn't how you thought it was. And so you're just always having to renounce your intention. So that's, I guess, the sort of final connection there to
yeah,
what Ziporyn is talking about. This release of intention for us, uh, what's sometimes called releasement in mystical tradition, is like having to be a daily practice, and I'm still not very good at it. So, um, uh, yet another interest about this book for us.
yeah. Well, good. I think we're at a good stopping point on the preface, and
Perfect.
we
Yeah,
can move on to part one of the introduction.
sounds good.